I was there when the silence broke. For 317 years, I had walked the Eternity Gate's approach, my guardian spear held in the same position my gene father had taught me millennia ago. The marble beneath my auramite boots bore the impression of my vigil, a groove worn into stone that had witnessed the birth of empires. In all that time, the Golden Throne's hum had never wavered, not once. It was the heartbeat of Terra, the pulse of the Imperium, the rhythm by which 10,000 years of history had measured itself. Until the moment it stopped. The silence lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I understood what it meant to be mortal again. Every gene-forged enhancement, every alchemical transcendence, every impossible reflex that made me more than human. All of it meant nothing against the sudden, crushing weight of that absence. 3 seconds of silence in which the psychic choir ceased their eternal song. The machinery of godhood fell still, and across the width of the Imperial Palace, 1,000,000 souls held their breath. Then it resumed. But the rhythm had changed. I am Shield-Captain Valdor Hereticus of the Adeptus Custodes, and I have stood watch over the Emperor of mankind for 4,732 years. I have seen Lord Commanders rise and fall, watched High Lords scheme and perish, witnessed saints and heretics alike make their pilgrimages to the Sanctum Imperialis. I have killed threats that would have ended worlds before they took their second step into these hallowed halls. I have been statue and sentinel, guardian and executioner, the golden wall against which the darkness breaks. But I had never been afraid until that moment. The Imperial Palace is not a building. It is a continent. It is a mountain range of cathedrals and fortresses, a maze of corridors that could swallow Hive City's whole, a labyrinth of secrets, built upon the bones of older secrets still. If you were to walk its perimeter at a steady pace, never stopping, never resting, you would die of old age before completing the circuit, and you would be a mere mortal. Even we, the Custodians, know only fragments of its true extent. The palace is divided into domains, each vast enough to house billions. The Sanctum Imperialis, where the Golden Throne pulses with dying light. The Hall of Leng, where the Officio Assassinorum maintains its silent cathedral of death. The Senatorum Imperialis, where the High Lords conduct their endless games of power. The Librarium Sanctus, containing every word the Emperor ever wrote, ever spoke, ever thought into existence during those brief centuries when he walked among us, and beneath it all the Webway Gate, the scar, the wound that never heals. Most who speak of the palace imagine golden towers reaching toward the sky, triumphant and eternal. They imagine glory. They are wrong. The palace is a mausoleum. It is the largest, most elaborate tomb ever constructed, and the corpse it houses still breathes. That changes everything. I had been standing my post at the Eternity Gate for less than a century, a brief assignment by our standards, when I first truly understood this. The gate itself is a work of impossible beauty. Adamantium 20 meters thick, carved with scenes of the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the triumph of reason over ignorance. It depicts the Emperor as he was, a general, a conqueror, a philosopher king who walked among his sons with purpose and vision. But the gate has not opened in 4,000 years. Behind it lies the Sanctum Imperialis. Behind that, the Golden Throne, and upon that throne, maintained by technology that even the Mechanicus barely comprehends, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers whose souls are burned to ash to keep the Astronomicon lit, sits what remains of the Emperor of mankind. They say he is healing. They say he dreams. They say his consciousness spans the galaxy, fighting an endless war in the Immaterium against the dark gods themselves. The ecclesiarchy preaches that he watches over every faithful soul, that he guides the Imperium's destiny, that he will rise again when mankind needs him most. I have stood closer to that throne than any living being save my brother Custodians and the caretakers of his flesh. I have felt the psychic pressure emanating from that chamber, a weight that makes your teeth ache and your enhanced bones creak. I have heard the screaming of the throne's mechanisms, the howling of the psychers as they are consumed, the impossible chorus of the chained women who sing to keep the Emperor's dreams from devouring us all. Healing is not the word I would choose. The change in the throne's rhythm came during the hour of shift change, when the Terran sun, that ancient dying star around which humanity first evolved, hung low over the adamantium spires. We do not require shift changes, not truly. A custodian can stand vigil for decades without rest. But the Captain General instituted the practice millennia ago, not for our benefit, but as a security measure. Fresh eyes catch what familiar ones miss. New perspectives prevent the complacency that killed the Emperor 10,000 years ago. I was to be relieved by Shield-Captain Artemidorus, a warrior I had fought beside during the War of the Beast, when the gates of Mars itself had fallen. We had held a corridor against a greenskin warboss and his retinue for 13 hours, just the two of us, our guardian spears singing their deadly song while the Mechanicum evacuated their greatest treasures. He was one of the few custodians whose company I valued, not for conversation as we rarely spoke, but for the perfect synchronicity of our martial communion. He emerged from the meridian approach at exactly the appointed moment, his auramite armor catching the amber light in the way that had inspired 1,000 generations of Imperial artists. Perfectly maintained, perfectly pristine, perfectly deadly. The red plume of his helm marked him as a shield captain, one of the few among our order who bore command responsibility. His guardian spear, Whisper of Oblivion, had tasted the blood of demon princes and Xenos warlords. Like all of us, he was a weapon forged in the Emperor's own genetic laboratories, tempered by centuries of war, honed to a single purpose. He stopped 3 paces from me, an unusual breach of protocol. The formal exchange required us to stand face to face as I reported any observations from my watch. His hesitation spoke volumes. "Brother," he said, and his voice carried a weight I had rarely heard. "The Captain General summons the 10,000 to the Senatorum chamber, all of us. We are to abandon our posts." The words made no sense. The 10,000, the common appellation for the Adeptus Custodes, though our numbers fluctuated slightly from age to age, never abandoned our posts. The Emperor's protection was absolute and eternal. Every hall, every corridor, every approach to the Sanctum Imperialis was guarded at all times. This was our sacred duty, our reason for existence. We were his bodyguard, and we had failed him once. We would not fail again. "The throne bearers," I asked, "remain in place. The Silent Sisters maintain their vigil. The mechanisms continue." His eyes met mine through our helms, a brief contact of consciousness. We did not have the psychic communion of the Astartes and their primarchs, but we had trained together for so long that we barely needed words. I saw his concern, mirrored my own. "How long has the Captain General been in conclave with the High Lords?" 17 hours. He has not emerged from the Chamber of Witness." Artemidorus tilted his head slightly, a gesture that indicated we should speak freely, away from even the possibility of surveillance. "Valdor, something has changed in the throne room. The Mechanicus adepts are in disorder. I saw one of them weeping as he performed his calibrations. Weeping. A magos of the cult Mechanicus, a being who has replaced 70% of his flesh with blessed machinery, reduced to tears." I felt something cold settle in my enhanced chest. Fear was a distant concept for a custodian. We were biologically incapable of panic, our neurological pathways rewired to convert terror into heightened awareness. But this was something else. This was the creeping dread that comes not from personal danger, but from witnessing the foundations of reality beginning to crack. "I will attend," I said, surrendering my post for the first time in 3 centuries. As we walked through the meridian approach, I noticed details I had not allowed myself to perceive during my vigil. A servo skull hovering near the ceiling, its orbit erratic, its data capture lens flickering. A section of wall where the perpetual lighting had failed, leaving a pool of shadows that should not have existed in these blessed halls. The faint smell of ozone and something else, something organic and wrong, and everywhere the absence of the palace's normal rhythms. Where were the pilgrims brought under guard to pray before the distant majesty of the Eternity Gate? Where were the streams of servitors carrying supplies and messages through the arterial corridors? Where were the Lucifer Blacks, the elite mortal guard who maintained order in the outer reaches? The palace felt abandoned, as if some unconscious instinct had driven everyone away from its heart. The Senatorum chamber was never meant to hold 10,000 custodians. It was designed for the High Lords of Terra, those 12 mortals who administered the Imperium in the Emperor's name. A circular room 500 meters across, with a domed ceiling painted with scenes from the Great Crusade. Each of the 12 High Lords had their throne, positioned according to ancient protocols of precedence and power. Above them, in a gallery meant for observers and lesser functionaries, the business of the Imperium's greatest decisions unfolded. Now, the chamber was filled with gold. We stood in perfect formation, rings within rings, each custodian exactly 2 meters from his brothers. 10,000 golden warriors, the greatest fighting force humanity had ever created, each one capable of slaughtering armies single-handedly. I had fought beside these warriors across a dozen campaigns. I knew many of their names, their styles, their histories stretching back millennia. Shield-Captain Laocoon, who had held the Lion's Gate against a Cornati incursion. Tribune Callistus, who had hunted down the cabal that tried to corrupt the Navis Nobilitae. Sentinel Aristeas, who had killed a Harlequin solitaire in single combat. Warriors beyond measure, beyond mortality, beyond fear. And yet, as we stood in that chamber, I felt the tension crackling through our ranks like a psychic storm. The Captain General entered from the High Lord's private entrance, flanked by 2 members of the Haikanatoi, his personal guard. Trajan Valoris was a legend even among legends, a warrior who had served for over 1,000 years as the supreme commander of the Adeptus Custodes. He bore the Watcher's Axe, the relic weapon of his office, and his presence commanded absolute attention. But it was not Valoris who silenced the chamber. It was the figure who walked beside him. She wore the black and white of the Sisters of Silence, the anathema Psychona, whose very existence negated the powers of the warp. Her armor was ancient, pre-unification design, and she carried a great blade that hummed with an energy I could not identify. But it was her face, bare as all Silent Sisters went unhelmed, that drew every eye. She was old, impossibly old. Her face was a map of scars and time, her eyes the color of centuries. I had seen Silent Sisters before, of course. They were essential to the Imperium's survival, nullifying psychic threats and maintaining order among the psyker populations. But this one was different. She carried an authority that transcended rank or protocol. And when she looked at us, I felt something I had not experienced since the day of my creation. I felt seen. Captain General Valoris raised the Watcher's Axe, and 10,000 warriors gave him their undivided attention. "Brothers," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of that vast chamber, "I bring news that will test the foundations of your faith, your duty, and your understanding of our purpose. 7 hours ago, at the height of the Terran night cycle, the Golden Throne's power fluctuated. For 3 seconds, the Astronomicon went dark. For 3 seconds, the psychic beacon that guides the Imperium's ships through the warp ceased to exist. A murmur ran through the assembly, a sound I had never heard from the Adeptus Custodes. We did not react, we did not speculate, but this news was unprecedented, catastrophic. The Astronomicon was the Imperium's lifeline. Without it, warp travel became impossible. Without warp travel, the Imperium's million worlds would be isolated, cut off, prey to Xenos and traitors, and the endless hunger of chaos. 3 seconds might as well have been 3 millennia. The tech priests of Mars have examined the throne's mechanisms, Valoris continued. Their analysis is grave. The throne is failing, not in centuries, not in years. The cascade has begun, and their most optimistic projections give us less than a Terran decade before catastrophic collapse becomes inevitable. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. But this is not why I have summoned you. The Captain General's gaze swept across us, and I saw something in his eyes I had never witnessed before. Uncertainty. The silent sister beside me is Matriarch Kairia Kazrin, the last living person to have spoken directly with the Emperor before the heresy. She has been in stasis for 9,000 years, preserved at his own command for this moment. She bears a message, a command, an explanation. The matriarch stepped forward. When she spoke, it was not with her voice. The Sisters of Silence were mute, their vocal cords removed as part of their initiation. Instead, her words appeared directly in our minds, carved into our consciousness with the precision of a laser-etching stone. I was there when he sat upon the throne. I was there when Magnus broke the Webway. I was there when the Emperor made his choice. The psychic sending was accompanied by images. Memories burned into her consciousness with such intensity that we could not help but experience them. I saw the throne room as it had been, pristine and functional, a marvel of human ingenuity combined with Xenos technology scavenged from the Webway's depths. I saw the Emperor, not the corpse god of the present, but the living man, standing before the throne's controls, his face set in an expression of terrible resolve. You believe he sits the throne to maintain the Astronomicon. You believe he fights the dark gods in the warp. You believe he sacrifices his humanity to protect mankind. The sending paused, and I felt her consciousness weighing us, judging whether we could bear what came next. You are wrong. The truth, when it came, was worse than any heresy I had imagined. The Webway project had been the Emperor's greatest work. For decades before the heresy, he had labored in secret beneath the palace, constructing a human-controlled passage into the ancient Eldar network that spanned the galaxy. With it, mankind would be free from dependence on the warp, free from the predations of chaos, free to expand and flourish without risking corruption with every journey between stars. Magnus the Red had destroyed it. His warning about Horus's betrayal, delivered with the best intentions through sorcery he did not fully understand, had shattered the Emperor's wards and unleashed a demonic incursion directly into the palace's foundations. The Emperor had been forced to abandon his great work, to sit upon the golden throne and hold shut the door Magnus had opened. This much we knew. This much was history, carved into the Imperium's memory. But Matriarch Kazrin showed us what came after. The throne was failing even then. The demonic energies corrupting it, the technology beyond our ability to fully repair. He knew from the moment he sat upon it that he would not rise again. Not in a century, not in 10,000 years. The throne was not a temporary prison. It was a coffin. I felt my enhanced biology straining against the implications. The Emperor had known. For 10,000 years, he had known that he would never walk among us again. But he also knew something else. The Astronomicon was never his primary purpose. It was a secondary function, a benefit derived from his psychic might. His true purpose on the throne was to hold the Webway Gate closed. to prevent the demonic legions trapped in that broken network from flooding into Terra itself. The images showed us horrors beyond description. The Webway's depths, where demons numbered in the billions pressed against the Emperor's psychic barriers. The constant, unending war he waged in that space between reality and the warp, a war that had raged for 10,000 years without pause or mercy. And now, the barriers are failing. The matriarch's next sending was not words, but pure sensation. I felt the pressure of the warp pressing against reality, felt the million claws scratching at the fabric of existence. I felt what the Emperor felt, magnified 1,000-fold, the weight of containing an invasion that should have drowned Terra in blood millennia ago. In less than a decade, the throne will fail completely. The Webway Gate will open, and Terra will become the largest demonic incursion point in the galaxy's history. Captain General Valdor stepped forward again. The Emperor has been communicating with the matriarch through dreams, through visions granted to her in stasis. His instructions are explicit. We have 3 options, and we must choose. He raised a single golden finger. First, we can maintain the current course. Continue feeding psychers to the throne, pray that the Mechanicus finds a way to repair it, and hope that the Emperor's strength holds. This ends with Terra's destruction when the throne fails. But it buys time. Perhaps a decade. Perhaps less. A second finger. Second, we can initiate the Terminus Decree, the final secret, known only to the chapter masters of the Grey Knights and the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes. A protocol left by the Emperor himself for the absolute end of hope. I will not speak its details here, but know that it involves the total annihilation of Terra and everything within 100 light years. It would kill the Emperor permanently, close the Webway Gate through sheer destruction, and eliminate the greatest concentration of human life in the galaxy. The Imperium would survive, but its heart would be ashes. A third finger, and Valdor's voice grew quieter. Third, we can attempt what the Emperor himself could not. We can enter the Webway, fight through the demonic legions, and close the gate from within, permanently. The Emperor would then be free to die, truly die, and Terra would survive. The implications crashed through the chamber like a tidal wave. The Emperor could die. The Emperor should die. After 10,000 years of agony, after millennia of being neither alive nor dead, neither god nor man, he could be granted the peace of oblivion, but it would require a war the likes of which even we had never fought. The Emperor's command, Valdor said, is that we attempt the third option. He believes the 10,000 are capable of this task. He believes that if we can fight our way to the Webway's deepest reaches, if we can activate the ancient sealing mechanisms left by the Eldar, we can trap the demonic hordes on the other side of reality and close the gate forever. He also believes, the Captain General's voice dropped to barely a whisper, that none of us will return. That this will be our final duty, our last service to him and to Terra. Tribune Callistus spoke, his voice resonant in the silence. How can we be certain this is truly his will? The Emperor has not spoken directly to anyone in 10,000 years. The matriarch could be deceived, corrupted. This could be a trap laid by the ruinous powers themselves. The matriarch turned her attention to Callistus, and her next sending carried a weight that made even a custodian stagger. I asked him the same question. He showed me this, and suddenly we were all there. All of us standing in the throne room as if we had been pulled through space and time. I saw the golden throne, that mountain of machinery and desperation. I saw the Emperor as he truly was, a skeletal figure wrapped in failing technology, his psychic might visible as a corona of desperate, agonized light. And I heard his voice, not psychic, not telepathic, his actual voice, rasping from a throat that had not drawn breath in millennia. My custodians, my 10,000, my sons, The word shattered something inside me. Sons. We were not his sons in the way the Primarchs had been, forged from his own genetic template and scattered across the stars. We were creations, yes, but lesser. Tools, weapons. Yet he called us sons. I have asked too much of you for too long. You were meant to be my companions, my guardians in a time of peace after the Great Crusade's end. Instead, I condemned you to 10,000 years of vigil, watching over a corpse while the Imperium rotted around you. I made you witnesses to humanity's descent into superstition and madness. I failed you as surely as I failed Horus, failed Magnus, failed all those I claimed to love. The Emperor's image turned, and for a moment, those terrible ancient eyes looked directly at me, through me, into me. Now I ask one final duty. I ask you to give your lives so that Terra may survive, so that the Imperium, corrupt and broken as it has become, may have a chance to endure. I cannot promise you glory. I cannot promise you remembrance. But I can promise you this: your sacrifice will matter. Your death will mean something, and perhaps in dying you will accomplish what I could not in living. You will give humanity a future. The vision ended. We stood again in the Senatorum chamber, 10,000 warriors confronting an impossible choice. Shield-Captain Artemidorus stepped forward. I volunteer to lead the first wave. The corridors of the Webway will need to be secured, mapped, fortified. It will be the most dangerous position. I claim it as my right. I stand with Artemidorus, Sentinel Aristeas said. If we are to die, let it be with purpose. One by one, voices rose throughout the chamber. Not all, not yet, but enough. The Adeptus Custodes were making their choice. Captain General Valoris raised the Watcher's axe again. Those who volunteer will be given 3 weeks to prepare. The Mechanicus will modify our war gear for combat in the Webway's corrupted spaces. The Silent Sisters will accompany us, their null fields essential to combating the demonic hordes. The Grey Knights have pledged a full brotherhood to support the advance, and the Emperor himself will guide us for as long as his strength endures. He lowered the axe and his voice became softer, almost gentle. For those who do not volunteer, I do not judge you. To stand vigil over Terra in our absence, to maintain order when news of this mission inevitably spreads, to guide the Imperium through the chaos that will follow. These are duties equally vital. Each custodian must choose his own path in this darkest hour. I looked around the chamber, at warriors I had fought beside for centuries. Some faces showed resolve, others showed doubt. A few showed the terrible understanding that whatever we chose, the Imperium we knew was ending. I volunteer, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. I was there when the silence broke. I will be there when it ends. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest of my long existence. The palace transformed from a mausoleum into a war camp. Forges that had not been lit in millennia roared to life, crafting weapons and armor specifically designed for combat in the Webway's reality-torn spaces. The Mechanicus worked around the clock, their rituals of maintenance becoming frantic prayers to the machine god. Servitors streamed through corridors in numbers I had never witnessed, carrying supplies and materiel toward the Webway Gate's access points. 7,342 custodians volunteered for the mission. The remaining 2,658 would stay behind, maintaining the palace's defenses and ensuring that the Imperium did not collapse into anarchy during our absence. Captain General Valoris himself would lead the assault, a decision that shocked many. The Captain General had not left Terra in living memory, but he insisted if the 10,000 were to die in the Emperor's service, their commander would die beside them. I spent my days training with weapons I had never expected to use. Null field generators, allowing us to operate in close proximity to the Sisters of Silence without their aura disrupting our enhanced biology. warp disruption grenades, crude but effective tools for temporarily banishing demonic entities. Sacred unguents and prayers provided by the ecclesiarchy that would supposedly protect our armor against the corrupting touch of chaos. I did not pray. The Custodians had never been a religious order. We knew the Emperor as a man, a transcendent being certainly, but a man nonetheless. We did not worship him, we served him. There was a difference. But in those last days, I found myself standing before the Eternity Gate at odd hours, staring at its carved surface and wondering what it all meant. The Emperor had created us to protect his vision of humanity's future. Now that vision was ash, and we were being asked to die not to preserve it, but merely to ensure that the ashes did not ignite into something worse. It was during one of these vigils that Tribune Callistus found me. The senior officer stood beside me in silence for long minutes before speaking. "Do you believe it?" he asked. "Do you believe the Emperor truly wants this?" I considered the question carefully. I believe the matriarch's visions were genuine. Whether they represent the Emperor's conscious will or the psychic death throes of a dying god, I cannot say. And yet you volunteer. What else would I do? I turned to face him. Stand vigil for another 1,000 years while Terra burns? Watch the Imperium collapse into darkness and tell myself I was following orders? We were created for a purpose, Tribune. That purpose is ending. Better to end well than to persist beyond our meaning. Callistus nodded slowly. The philosophers of ancient Terra had a concept, the good death. To die at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. The Stoics believed it was the only freedom that could never be taken from you. "Are you volunteering?" I asked. "I am." His voice was steady. "Not because I believe we will succeed. The Emperor himself could not close that gate, and we are not him. But because the attempt must be made, because if there is even a fraction of a chance that we can spare Terra, spare humanity, then our lives are well spent. And if we fail, then we will die as custodians, weapons broken in the Emperor's hand." He placed a golden gauntlet on my shoulder. "I have fought beside you for 3,000 years, Valdor. If I must fall, I am honored to fall with you." We stood together before the Eternity Gate, two warriors contemplating the end of everything they had known, and found a strange peace in that shared silence. The day of the assault came with no ceremony. The High Lords were not informed. Officially, we were conducting a routine security sweep of the palace's lowest levels. The wider Imperium would not learn of this mission until it was already over, success or failure determined. Captain General Valoris had insisted on this. If we failed, he reasoned, there was no need to spread panic across the galaxy. The Terminus Decree could still be activated. Terra could still be destroyed in a controlled fashion rather than consumed by demonic incursion. If we succeeded, well, the Imperium would learn that the God Emperor had passed into true death, that their living deity was gone. The Captain General had prepared messages to be delivered to key figures: the Lord Commander Militant, the Ecclesiarch, the Fabricator General of Mars. How they would handle the revelation was beyond our concern. We gathered in the Hall of Leng, a massive cathedral chamber 5 kilometers below the palace's surface. This had once been a strategic planning center during the Great Crusade, where the Emperor and his Primarchs had mapped the conquest of the galaxy. Now it was a staging ground for the Imperium's last desperate gambit. 7,000 Custodians stood in perfect formation, our auramite armor gleaming in the dim light. We were arrayed by specialty: the Sentinel Guard, experts in defensive warfare; the Shield Companies, masters of coordinated assault; the Haikanatoi, elite even among the elite; and the Wardens who would hold the rear and ensure our line of retreat remained open as long as possible. Beside us stood 300 Silent Sisters, their black and white armor forming a somber contrast to our gold. Their null fields washed over us like cold water, uncomfortable but necessary. In the Webway's corrupted spaces, we would need their protection against psychic assault. And beyond them, the Grey Knights. 50 paladins, the finest demon hunters humanity had ever produced, led by Brother Captain Arvin Stern himself. They wore silver armor inscribed with wards and prayers, and they carried weapons that could wound the Neverborn permanently. If the Custodians were the spear tip, the Grey Knights were the poison on the blade. Captain General Valoris stood before us, the Watcher's axe held across his chest. Behind him, the entrance to the Webway, a shimmering portal of impossible geometry, held stable by technology that predated humanity's first ventures into space. Through it, I could see the corridor beyond, a tunnel of crystalline material that reflected and refracted light in ways that hurt to perceive. And deeper, far deeper, the corruption was visible. Red-black tendrils of warp energy eating away at the Webway structure like cancer. "Warriors of the Imperium," Valoris said, his voice carrying to every corner of that vast hall. "In a moment, we will step through this portal and enter a realm that has been contested for 10,000 years. The Emperor has held this ground alone, fighting a war that would have driven any lesser being mad within seconds. Now we go to finish what he started, to grant him the peace he has earned, and to save Terra from the doom he has forestalled for so long." He raised the Watcher's axe high. "We are the Adeptus Custodes. We are his bodyguard, his companions, his final gift to a species that has forgotten how to dream. If we must die to preserve that species, then we die well. If we must be forgotten to ensure Terra's survival, then let our names be lost. All that matters is the mission. All that matters is the Emperor's will." "For the Emperor," Tribune Callistus said. "For Terra," Shield-Captain Artemidorus added. "For humanity," I finished. The chant spread through our ranks, a low rumble that grew to a thunder. For the Emperor, for Terra, for humanity. And then we marched into the Webway. The first hours were almost beautiful. The Webway's architecture was elegant beyond anything human hands had crafted. Crystalline corridors that seemed to extend forever, refracting light into impossible spectrums. Branching pathways that led to distant stars, shortcuts through reality that could traverse the galaxy in hours rather than years. I could see why the Emperor had wanted this technology, why he had spent decades trying to understand and harness it. I could also see why he had failed. The Webway was dying. The Eldar who had built it were a pale shadow of their former glory, and they no longer maintained these passages with the same meticulous care. But more than that, the Webway was infected. Chaos had found its way in during the war in heaven, during the fall of the Eldar, during 10,000 smaller breaches and tears. The crystal walls were cracked, allowing warp energy to seep through like poison. The elegant architecture was crusted over with demonic corruption, transforming beauty into nightmare. We advanced in a column 100 custodians wide, our formation designed to sweep corridors clean with maximum efficiency. The Silent Sisters moved among us, their null fields creating bubbles of sanity in a realm that defied natural law. The Grey Knights held the center, their psychic might focused on detecting ambushes before they materialized. The demons came after the first kilometer. They erupted from the walls themselves, lesser entities of chaos drawn to the presence of so many souls. Bloodletters, horrors, plague-bearers, the foot soldiers of the dark gods, each one capable of tearing through a squad of mortal soldiers in seconds. They died in seconds against us. My guardian spear sang as I drove it through a bloodletter's skull, the weapon's power field annihilating the demon's essence. Around me, my brothers fought with the precision of 1,000 years' experience, every movement economical and lethal. The demons came in waves and we cut them down like wheat before the scythe. But they were not trying to stop us. They were testing us. After the first engagement, Tribune Callistus called a halt. We formed a defensive perimeter while he and the Captain General conferred with Brother Captain Stern. "They are gauging our strength," Stern said, his voice distorted by his helm's vox grill. "The greater entities will be watching, analyzing our tactics and capabilities. They will not commit their true forces until they understand what they face." "How long until they realize what we are?" Valoris asked. "They already know," I interjected. "Look at the walls." The corruption had changed. Where before it had been random, chaotic, now it formed patterns, symbols, words in languages that predated human civilization, carved into reality itself by entities that could think in ways no mortal mind could comprehend. "The Golden Ones come to die his final children. March to their tomb 10,000 years of waiting ends in blood." "They have been preparing for this moment," I said quietly. "The Emperor kept them occupied, held them at bay through sheer will and psychic might. But they knew, eventually, that he would weaken, that we would come. This is what they have been planning for 10 millennia." Valoris stared at the writings, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Not fear. We were beyond that, but recognition, understanding. We were not walking into a battle. We were walking into a trap that had been set before some of us were even created. "Does it matter?" Tribune Callistus asked. "We knew this would be a death sentence when we volunteered. At least now we know our deaths will inconvenience them." A grim chuckle ran through the nearest custodians. Dark humor, the last refuge of warriors who knew they were doomed. "Forward," Valoris commanded. "Whatever they have planned, we will face it as custodians. We will make them pay for every meter of ground in blood that will stain the warp itself." We marched deeper into the webway, and the demons came again. The fighting intensified as we descended. The webway was not a linear structure. It was a maze of interconnected pathways, some leading to distant parts of the galaxy, others looping back on themselves in impossible geometries. The Emperor had given us detailed maps, psychically imprinted into the matriarch's consciousness, but the webway shifted. Passages that had existed 10,000 years ago were now collapsed. New routes had opened, carved by demonic incursions or Eldar craft worlds passing through. We adapted. Custodians were nothing if not adaptive. The demons grew stronger with each engagement. Lesser entities gave way to bloodthirsters, towering engines of rage that could cleave a tank in two. Horrors of Tzeentch, cackling as they hurled warpfire that melted through armor. Great unclean ones, bloated masses of pestilence that poisoned the very air around them. We killed them all. My guardian spear became an extension of my will. Every thrust and parry executed with perfection, born of millennia of training. Around me, my brothers fought with the same lethal grace. We moved as one organism, a golden tide that swept through the webway's corridors, leaving only banished entities and scorched crystal in our wake. But we were taking losses. Sentinel Aristeus fell in the 4th hour, his helmet crushed by a bloodthirster's axe. He had been fighting for 3,000 years, had killed a Harlequin solitaire, had stood vigil over the Emperor's sanctum through countless crises. He died in seconds, his enhanced biology insufficient against a demon prince's fury. We burned his body and moved on. There was no time for mourning. Shield-Captain Artemidorus lost his arm in the 6th hour, torn away by a lord of change. He continued fighting, his remaining hand wielding his guardian spear with undiminished skill, until a Sister of Silence could seal the wound with sacred unguents. He refused evacuation. We needed every warrior. Tribune Callistus was struck by warpfire in the 8th hour. The flames did not burn his armor, they burned his soul. I watched my friend of 3 millennia scream as his essence was consumed, his consciousness torn apart by energies that should not exist in real space. The Silent Sisters tried to null the effect, but it was too late. Callistus died cursing the dark gods with his last breath. and we could not even recover his body. The Grey Knights suffered as well. Brother Captain Stern's paladins fell one by one, their psychic powers making them targets for the Webway's corruption. Each death diminished our capability to detect ambushes, to counter psychic assault, to wound demons permanently. By the 10th hour, only 30 Grey Knights remained. And still we advanced. Captain General Valorous led from the front, the Watcher's axe reaping a terrible toll among the demonic hordes. He fought with a fury I had never witnessed, as if personally affronted by every entity that stood between us and our objective. Around him, the Haikanatoi formed an impenetrable wall, their synchronized movements a work of deadly art. But even the Captain General could not hide his concern. We had advanced less than 50 kilometers into the Webway, and we had already lost 300 custodians. The mathematics were inexorable. At this rate, we would be annihilated long before reaching the gate's sealing mechanism. It was during a brief respite, as we fortified a nexus chamber and treated our wounded, that the revelation came. Matriarch Kazrin approached Valorous and me, her ancient face grave. When she sent, her psychic communication bypassed even the Silent Sisters' null fields through sheer force of will. The Emperor speaks. He says the path forward divides. One route leads to the sealing mechanism, a direct assault that will cost every life. The other leads to a different objective, a choice he did not reveal until this moment. What choice? Valorous demanded. The Matriarch's next sending came with images. I saw deeper into the Webway, to a place where the crystalline corridors gave way to something else, a chamber, a throne, and upon that throne, a figure. When Magnus shattered the Webway's wards, he did more than unleash demons. He created a tear between real space and the warp, a wound that exists in both places simultaneously. The Emperor has been holding that wound closed through psychic might alone. But there is another way to seal it. She showed us the figure on the throne more clearly. It was not human. It was not alien. It was something that had once been both and had become neither. A psyker of unimaginable power, trapped in a prison of its own making, sustained by demonic essence and hatred so pure it had kept it conscious for 10,000 years. Magnus the Red. What remains of him? The Emperor's most beloved son, corrupted by chaos but too proud to fully submit. He has been holding a portion of the gate closed from the other side, fighting his own private war against the dark gods. Not out of loyalty, out of spite. I felt my enhanced biology struggling to process this. Magnus was alive. Magnus, who had doomed Terra through arrogance and ignorance. Magnus, who had fallen to Tzeentch. Magnus, who the Emperor had loved more than any save perhaps Horus himself. What is the choice? I asked. We can attempt to reach the sealing mechanism and close the gate mechanically. This will require fighting through every demon in the Webway, and the Emperor believes fewer than 1,000 of us will survive to reach it. Even then, success is uncertain. Or we can reach Magnus. The Emperor can communicate with what remains of his son's consciousness. There is a way, a terrible way, to seal the gate permanently using Magnus's essence. But it would require convincing Magnus to accept utter annihilation, not death, not banishment, true obliteration, erasing even the possibility of his soul's existence in the warp. Why would Magnus agree to this? Valorous asked. Because the alternative is watching Terra burn. Because even corrupted, even fallen, some part of him still loves humanity, still loves the Emperor. And because the Emperor is willing to offer something in exchange. What could the Emperor possibly offer a demon Primarch? I demanded. The Matriarch's expression twisted into something that might have been sympathy, forgiveness, the knowledge that he was loved, that his father's final thoughts were of him, not with anger or disappointment, but with the grief of a parent who failed their child. The silence that followed was absolute. How long to reach Magnus? Valoris asked finally. Less than 20 kilometers. A fraction of the distance to the sealing mechanism, but the path is more heavily defended. Magnus's prison is in the deepest corruption, where the webway and the warp are almost indistinguishable. The demons will throw everything at us to prevent this union. The Captain General looked at me, then at the surviving Tribune commanders. Opinions? We are already dying, one of them said. Better to die quickly with a chance of success than slowly with certainty of failure. Magnus cannot be trusted, another argued. He betrayed the Emperor once. He will do so again. The Emperor believes otherwise, I said quietly. And if he is wrong, we die. If he is right, we save Terra. The choice seems clear. Valoris nodded slowly. We march for Magnus, all of us. No division of forces, no contingencies. We reach him or we die trying. He activated his Voxcaster, broadcasting to all surviving warriors. The objective has changed. We march to save a traitor so that he may save Terra. I will not pretend this is glorious or just, but it is necessary. For the Emperor, for Terra, for humanity. The response came as one voice. For the Emperor, for Terra, for humanity. We marched into the deepest darkness. The final 20 kilometers took 2 days. 2 days of unrelenting combat against entities that should not exist, in a realm that defied every law of physics and sanity. The webway's corridors collapsed behind us, cutting off retreat. The demons came in waves that seemed endless, each one more terrible than the last. Greater demons began appearing in numbers, bloodthirsters by the dozen, lords of change that could rewrite reality with a gesture. Great unclean ones whose very presence corroded our armor, keepers of secrets that whispered promises and threats directly into our minds. The Silent Sisters died first. Their null fields were essential, but they made them targets. The demons focused their fury on the sisters, and one by one, they fell. By the end of the first day, only 50 remained. By the middle of the second, only 10. When the last sister fell, her throat torn out by a bloodletter, we lost our primary defense against psychic assault. The Grey Knights shouldered that burden. Brother Captain Stern and his remaining paladins formed a psychic shield around our column, holding back the warp's corruption through sheer force of will. I watched them age in real time, their bodies withering as they burned their very life force to maintain the barrier. Stern died on the second day. He simply collapsed, his body crumbling to dust inside his armor. With his last breath, he passed command to his second, who lasted 3 more hours before succumbing to the same fate. By the time we reached Magnus's prison, only 2 Grey Knights remained. 2 warriors out of 50, holding back the apocalypse through faith and determination. We Custodians fared better, but not by much. Our enhanced biology and auramite armor provided some protection against the webway's corruption. But we were not immune. I watched warriors I had fought beside for millennia fall to madness, to possession, to simple exhaustion. The webway did not just attack the body. It attacked the mind, the soul, the very concept of self. Shield-Captain Artemidorus died holding a corridor against 3 bloodthirsters. He lasted 17 minutes, fighting with one arm, his armor shattered, his guardian spear broken. When he finally fell, he took all 3 demons with him, their essences banished by the sacred unguents he detonated against them. I reached his body minutes later. There was nothing to recover. The explosion had consumed everything, leaving only a scorched outline where he had made his final stand. He died well, Valoris said beside me. He died at all, I replied. That is the tragedy. We pressed forward. Magnus's prison was a mockery of the Golden Throne. It sat in a chamber carved from crystalline webway material that had been corrupted beyond recognition. The walls pulsed with warp energy, covered in writings that hurt to perceive. Demonic faces pressed against the crystal from the other side, screaming soundlessly. The air itself was thick with power, making every breath an effort. And in the center, upon a throne of twisted metal and fossilized bone, sat what remained of Magnus the Red. He had been beautiful once by all accounts, a giant even among Primarchs, crimson-skinned, one-eyed, radiating wisdom and power. The Emperor's most psychically gifted son, a scholar and philosopher who had dreamed of unlocking the secrets of the universe. Now he was a nightmare. His body had been rebuilt countless times by demonic energies, each resurrection leaving him more monstrous. Extra limbs sprouted from his torso, each one ending in claws or tentacles. His single eye had multiplied into dozens, scattered across his face and body like pustules. Wings of raw warp stuff erupted from his back, constantly shifting between forms, feathered, leathery, crystalline, dissolving into smoke and reforming. But his face, that central eye, retained something recognizable: intelligence, awareness, suffering. Chains of impossible energy bound him to the throne. They extended into the warp itself, connecting him to a million threads of power. I realized with horror that the chains were not restraining him, they were sustaining him. They were keeping him conscious, preventing him from dissipating into the warp's currents, forcing him to maintain his prison despite the agony it caused. Around the throne, the demonic hordes massed. Every entity we had fought, every horror we had banished, they all converged here, bloodthirsters in their hundreds, lords of change by the score. A great unclean one so vast it filled half the chamber, and above them all, watching from the shadowed corners of reality, the greater entities. Demons whose names I would not think, lest thinking them gave them power. We numbered 3,217 custodians, 2 Grey Knights, no Silent Sisters, no hope of reinforcement. Captain General Valoris raised the Watcher's axe. Shield wall formation. Hold them back while I speak with Magnus. For the Emperor. For the Emperor. We roared and charged. The battle that followed was beyond description. We fought not as individuals, but as a single organism, each custodian a cell in a larger body. Our guardian spears wove patterns of death, creating a perimeter around the throne. The demons crashed against us like waves against a cliff, and for a time, minutes, hours, I lost track. We held. I killed a bloodthirster with a thrust through its eye, spun and took a Lord of Change's wing with a backhanded slash. Blocked a plague sword with my spear's haft, countered, drove the blade through a plague bearer's torso. Moved to my brother's side, synchronized our strikes, bisected a herald of Khorne. Again. My armor was breached in 17 places. Demonic claws had carved furrows through auramite that should have been impervious. Warp fire had melted sections of my breastplate. A tentacle had wrapped around my leg, burning through the metal before I could sever it, leaving corruption spreading up toward my knee. I could feel it, the slow poison of chaos working its way through my enhanced biology. In minutes, hours at most, it would reach my brain. I would fall to madness or death, whichever came first. I fought on. Around me, my brothers fell. Not in ones or twos, but in waves. The demons were infinite, and we were not. For every entity we banished, 3 more took its place. For every moment we held, we lost warriors who could never be replaced. But we held. We held because Captain General Valoris needed time. Time to do what no one had done in 10,000 years. Time to speak with Magnus the Red. I could not hear their conversation. The battle was too chaotic, too loud, but I could see it unfold. Valoris climbed the steps to Magnus's throne, the Watcher's axe held across his chest in a gesture of parley rather than threat. The demonic entities around the throne hissed and snarled, but they did not attack. Even the demons recognized that this moment was significant, that something was happening that transcended mere violence. Magnus's multitude of eyes focused on the Captain General. His mouth, one of several mouths scattered across his corrupted body, opened, and words came out. Not in Gothic, not in any human language, but in the tongue of the warp itself. Words that made reality shudder. Valoris responded. I could not hear, but I could see his lips moving, see the determination in his stance. He was not pleading. He was not demanding. He was offering. Magnus laughed. The sound was agony given voice, the scream of a soul that had been tortured for 10 millennia. It echoed through the chamber, through the webway, perhaps through the entire galaxy. Demons flinched. My brothers stumbled. I felt my enhanced hearing struggling to process the sound without going mad. But there was something else in that laugh, something beneath the madness and pain. Recognition, perhaps even relief. Valoris extended his hand. Magnus stared at it. A simple gesture, human and impossibly out of place in this realm of nightmare. An offering of connection, of forgiveness, of understanding. The Primarch's central eye, that last remnant of who he had been, began to weep. Tears of liquid warp stuff rolled down his corrupted face, hissing as they struck the throne. His extra eyes closed, one by one, leaving only that original eye open. His extra limbs retracted, pulling back into his body. For a moment, just a moment, he looked almost human again. And he reached out to take Valoris's hand. The moment they touched, reality screamed. I cannot describe what happened next in any coherent way. My enhanced mind, designed to process information at speeds no mortal could match, could barely comprehend what I was witnessing. The chamber exploded with light. Not normal light, but psychic radiance so intense it burned. I felt it wash over me, through me, and for an instant, I was somewhere else. I stood in a laboratory, clean, pristine, filled with equipment I could not identify. A figure worked at a console, tall, copper-skinned, possessed of an authority that made even the concept of defiance seem absurd. The Emperor, as he had been during the Great Crusade. Beside him stood a child, a boy with crimson skin and a single eye, perhaps 10 years old in appearance, watching his father work with an expression of absolute adoration. "Will you teach me?" the boy asked. The Emperor looked down at him and smiled. "I will teach you everything, my son. You will be my greatest work. My philosopher king, my scholar warrior, my bridge between humanity and the mysteries of the universe. I will not fail you," Magnus said, his child's voice filled with determination. "I know you won't," the Emperor replied, and placed a hand on his son's head. The vision shifted. Magnus as a young man, standing before a council of his legion. "We will master the warp," he declared. "Not through ignorance and fear, but through understanding. We will use its power to enlighten humanity, to cure every disease, to unlock every secret. My father has shown me the way." Another shift. Magnus kneeling before the Emperor, his face anguished. "Father, Horus has betrayed you. I have seen it in the warp. I come to warn you." The wards shattering, the webway rupturing, the Emperor's face not angry, but devastated, heartbroken. "Magnus, what have you done?" "I only wanted to help," Magnus whispered, his voice that of a lost child. The visions accelerated. Magnus's flight to his homeworld, his corruption by Tzeentch, his desperate attempts to resist, to maintain some fragment of his former self. His bargain with the changer of ways. Imprison him here, let him fight to hold back the demonic tide. Let him do something, anything to atone. 10,000 years of torment, 10,000 years of watching the Imperium decay into the very ignorance and superstition he had fought against. 10,000 years of knowing he had doomed his father, had destroyed his father's greatest work, had betrayed everything he loved. And through it all, the hope, the desperate, impossible hope that someday, somehow his father would forgive him. The visions ended. I was back in the chamber, on my knees, my guardian spear fallen from nerveless fingers. Around me, every warrior, custodian and demon alike, had stopped fighting. We were all witnessing something beyond conflict, beyond allegiance, beyond even the eternal war between order and chaos. We were witnessing a father and son reconcile. Magnus rose from his throne. The chains of energy shattered, their psychic force dispersing into the warp. The corruption that had covered his body began to burn away, not destroyed but discarded. His extra limbs dissolved. His multiple eyes closed and vanished. The wings of warp stuff retracted. He stood as he must have stood during the Great Crusade, a Primarch in his prime, terrible and beautiful, radiating power that made the demons surrounding us shrink back in fear. "Father speaks," Magnus said, his voice resonant and clear. "He says the time has come. The gate must be sealed, and I am the seal. My essence, woven into the webway structure at the point of rupture, will close the wound permanently. But to do this, I must be unmade, not killed. Killing me would only return my essence to the warp, where Tzeentch could reclaim it. I must be annihilated utterly, my soul burned away until not even the memory of my existence remains." He looked at Valoris, then beyond him toward the chamber's entrance, toward Terra, impossibly distant but present in his mind. "My father asks if I am willing, if I can accept true death, the ending of all endings, for the species I betrayed." Magnus smiled. It was sad and beautiful and completely human. "I answer, I have been dead for 10,000 years. What comes next is mercy." The demons screamed. They surged forward, no longer restrained by whatever force had held them back during the parley. The greater demons manifested fully, entities of such power that their mere presence warped reality. But Magnus was a Primarch, a demigod forged by the Emperor's own hand. And for this moment he was free. He raised his hand, and psychic fire erupted from his palm, not warp fire, true fire burning with the light of 1,000 suns. It swept across the chamber, and where it touched, demons ceased to exist. Not banished, not driven back, annihilated, their essences burned to nothing. "Go!" Magnus roared to us. "Return to Terra. I will hold them here while I prepare the seal." Captain General Valoris did not hesitate. "Custodians fighting retreat, move." We moved. Broken, bloodied, fewer than 3,000 strong, we fought our way back through the corridor. Behind us, Magnus's psychic might held the demonic horde at bay, his power burning brighter with each passing second. I was near the rear guard when I heard it, not with my ears but directly in my mind. Magnus's voice, speaking to every custodian simultaneously. "Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I love him. Tell him his son died knowing he was forgiven." And then, the light. The seal was not instantaneous. It took hours for Magnus to unmake himself, to weave his essence into the webway's structure at every point of corruption. We ran as he burned, feeling the ripples of his sacrifice washing through reality itself. The webway began to collapse behind us. Not catastrophically, but methodically, crystalline corridors sealing shut as Magnus's power filled them. The demons, sensing their prison being rebuilt, threw everything they had at us. But they were too late. By the time we reached the palace entrance, Magnus had completed his work. The Webway Gate slammed shut with a finality that made the entire palace shudder. And in that moment, in every corner of the Imperium, in every chapel and cathedral and shrine, the faithful heard something they had not heard in 10,000 years. The Emperor's voice, clear, certain, at peace. "It is done. My son has returned to me. Terra is saved. I can rest now." And the golden throne fell silent. I stood in the Hall of Leng, surrounded by the survivors. 2,863 custodians remained of the 7,000 who had entered the webway. 2 gray knights, so exhausted they could barely stand. No silent sisters, no matriarch. She had chosen to remain in the throne room to witness the Emperor's final moments. Captain General Valoris faced us, the Watcher's axe held loosely at his side. He looked old. Not physically, Custodians did not age, but in his eyes. He had the expression of someone who had carried an impossible burden for too long and finally set it down. "Brothers," he said quietly, "the Emperor is dead, truly permanently dead. The Golden Throne is inactive. The Astronomicon has fallen dark." He paused, letting that reality sink in. "But Terra lives. The Imperium survives, and we have our duty still." He straightened, some of his authority returning. "The Imperium will need guidance through what comes next. The High Lords will panic. The Ecclesiarchy will struggle to reconcile their god's death with their faith. Across the galaxy, millions of worlds will face crisis as they lose the Astronomicon's guidance. But they will adapt. Humanity always adapts, and we will help them. Not as the Emperor's bodyguard, that duty is finished, but as his legacy, his final gift to a species that must learn to stand on its own." He looked at each of us in turn. "We are no longer just guardians, we are guides, teachers, protectors not of one man but of all mankind. This is the duty the Emperor has left us. This is how we honor his sacrifice and Magnus's redemption. Will you stand with me?" The answer came as one voice, hoarse but unbroken. "We stand. I am Shield-Captain Valdor Hereticus of the Adeptus Custodes, and I have witnessed the end of an age. 10,000 years of history ended in those Webway corridors. The Emperor who had unified Terra, who had launched the Great Crusade, who had dreamed of a rational, enlightened humanity free from superstition and fear, he is gone. The living God, worshipped by trillions, sustained by endless sacrifice, the beacon around which the Imperium organized itself, he is gone. And yet Terra endures. The transition has not been easy. Without the Astronomicon, warp travel became far more dangerous. Entire sectors were cut off, left to fend for themselves. Some fell to chaos, some to Xenos. Some simply descended into civil war and barbarism, but others adapted. The navigators learned new techniques, guided by the Emperor's final psychic emanations before his death. The Mechanicus developed alternative FTL methods, slow and expensive but functional. Local governance strengthened, worlds learning to survive without Terra's constant oversight. The Ecclesiarchy fractured. Some branches accepted the Emperor's mortality, transforming their worship into veneration of his ideals rather than his person. Others refused to believe, insisting that his silence was merely a test of faith. A few descended into nihilistic violence, convinced that without their god, nothing mattered. We Custodians became arbiters, mediators, peacekeepers. We traveled the Imperium, lending our strength to worlds in crisis, our wisdom to leaders facing impossible choices. We were no longer the silent guardians standing vigil over a corpse. We were what the Emperor had always wanted us to be, his companions, walking among humanity to guide and protect. It has been 50 years since Magnus sealed the gate. 50 years since the Emperor died. I am older now, not in body but in understanding. I have seen humanity at its worst, petty, cruel, short-sighted. But I have also seen it at its best, resilient, innovative, capable of tremendous courage in the face of darkness. The Imperium survives. Changed, diminished in some ways, but perhaps stronger for it. We no longer lean on the crutch of a god-emperor to solve our problems. We face the galaxy as ourselves, flawed, mortal, but enduring. I stand now before the Eternity Gate, as I did 5,000 years ago when the silence broke. The gate has not opened since that day. Behind it, the Sanctum Imperialis stands empty. The Golden Throne is maintained as a memorial, a reminder of the price of hubris and the power of sacrifice. Sometimes I think I can still feel his presence, not as a living being, but as an echo. A memory woven into the palace's very stones. I imagine he watches us, curious to see if we can succeed where he failed. If we can build the future he dreamed of, not through force or genetic engineering, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. I do not know if humanity will survive the next 10,000 years. I do not know if the Imperium will endure, or if it will fragment into 1,000 smaller nations, each finding their own path forward. I do not know if we will fall to chaos, to Xenos, to our own darker natures. But I know this: we will try, we will fight, we will endure, because that is what humanity does. And in the end, perhaps that is what the Emperor wanted all along. Not obedient servants, not worshipful children, but a species capable of standing on its own, strong enough to survive his absence, wise enough to learn from his mistakes. I am Valdor Hereticus, and I was there when the silence broke. I will be there when humanity finds its voice again. For the Emperor, for Terra, for humanity.